Good morning, Nick. It's Tuesday. So people often ask me why I'm obsessed with tuberculosis, and this is why. In 2019, I visited the Tuberculosis Hospital in Sierra Leone and met this boy, Henry, who shares a name with my son and seemed about the same age. Henry immediately began walking me around the hospital, showing me grounds and introducing me to various staff members, and I thought he must be like a child of a nurse or something. But when I spoke later to one of the doctors, he told me, Henry is a patient, and one we're very concerned about. It turns out that Henry was not 9 years old, like my son. He was 16. It's just that his body had been ravaged by tuberculosis. So after I found out Henry was a patient, I asked him how he was feeling.
Okay now.
But that turned out to be false hope. Henry had been a great student before getting sick. He dreamt of attending university, and his mother, Isatu, worked incredibly hard to pay for his school fees. She ran a small business selling scented oils and perfumes at a local market. But by the time I met Henry, he was completely out of school and had been a full-time patient at LaCa for more than 2 months, receiving these injections to treat his multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. The injection treatment is super toxic. It causes permanent hearing loss in up to 20% of patients. It can also cause liver and kidney failure, but it was the only option available to Henry. Now, there was a better and less toxic treatment protocol involving the drug bedaquiline that had been available for years in the United States and other rich countries, but it was deemed too expensive by global health authorities, and so people like Henry couldn't access it. In fact, even the injections were relatively new in Sierra Leone at the time, as Dr. Jérôme Tefera explained to me.
Before PIH, if you have immediately before 2017, yes, you are waiting for the time of your list.
And so the injections were an improvement, but unfortunately they were not working for Henry. He began losing weight, the swelling from the TB invading his lymph nodes erupted into open wounds, and he was hemorrhaging so much blood that he required blood transfusions. His mother, Isatu, had to pay the equivalent of thousands of dollars to support Henry's treatment, finding blood for blood transfusions and other supplies that he needed, and in the process, she lost her business and her apartment. But right, about Dr. Tefera, he'd arrived in Sierra Leone a few months after I first met Henry from his home country of Ethiopia, and he also initially thought that Henry must either be like a staff member or a child of one, because he was just so good at encouraging the other patients, and he was so friendly and always helping everyone. But when he saw Henry's lab work, he became very, very concerned because the injectables had clearly failed. He later told me, when I saw that we have no option, that's when I thought, we're going to lose this young kid. And Henry knew how sick he was, and he also knew what it meant, because he'd seen his best friend at LaCa die of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis after the injectables failed. But as Dr. Tefera told me, in the field of TB, you have to keep trying. So he called his colleagues at Partners in Health and the Sierra Leonean Ministry of Health, and he was like, look, some of the drugs we need are in Liberia, some are in Lesotho. Is there any way that we can get them here together to help save this kid? Yes, it's only one kid, but tell that to his mother, and maybe this one kid can be the first of many. I came home from that trip just obsessed with tuberculosis, a disease that, despite usually being curable, still kills over 1.5 million people per year, more than are killed by malaria and HIV combined. And I spent the next few years trying to learn about the disease, and along the way I often thought of and prayed for Henry, but I never had the courage to ask my friends at Partners in Health what had happened to him. But finally, when Sarah and I returned to LaCa in 2023, I asked one of the nurses there, do you remember a patient named Henry? And she said, Henry? Of course, he's here today. He wanted to visit to see you.
Oh, he's now in university. He's first year.
Henry became the first person in Sierra Leone to receive the bedaquiline-based cocktail, and he improved extremely quickly. Dr. Tefera told me that it was like magic. Within 3 weeks, he went from what would have been his deathbed to walking and talking and laughing, and eventually he was cured. And after more than 2 years at LaCa, he was finally able to go home.
Now I'm back to pursue my dream to achieve it. I'm so happy to be alive again.
Is that what it feels like to be alive again?
Yeah.
Henry went back to school, and thanks to support from Partners in Health, he's attending the University of Sierra Leone, studying human resources management. He dreams of working in business and of traveling the world. Oh, and he's just started a YouTube channel and a Discord server. On YouTube, he makes videos showing daily life in Freetown. He also does interviews with people in the community and makes great vlogs. And he's really excited to connect with our community on YouTube and Discord and elsewhere. He currently only has 4 subscribers on YouTube, and if I know Nerdfighteria, I think we can bump that up. Henry is here with us because of extraordinary efforts made by himself, by his family, by charities, by his caregivers, and by his government. He gets to be here, he gets to have a YouTube channel and hopefully connect with lots of you and help you glimpse what his life is like. He gets to figure out Discord and take tests and hang out with his friends and try to help his mom. But none of that should require extraordinary efforts. Henry never should have become so sick that his mother lost her life savings. He should never have missed years of school, and he should never have been denied access to bedaquiline simply because of where he was born. And unfortunately, all of that is still happening millions of times over to kids around the world. And that's why I'm obsessed with tuberculosis. And I know it's worth the fight because of Henry, because he's here with us. Hank, you'll find links to Henry's YouTube and Discord and fundraiser in the doobly-doo below. I'll see you on Friday.
Good morning, Hank. It's Wednesday. Come with me to speak at the United Nations. So Sarah and I first visited a picnic for TB survivors and activists, and then attended a pre-meeting meeting, and then the next day went to another pre-meeting meeting, which you would think I'd find unbearable, but actually I loved it because I love hating tuberculosis so much. Plus, I got to see one of my heroes, Dr. Luchika Ditu, and another one of my heroes, the writer and surgeon Dr. Atul Gawande, and another one of my heroes, Dr. Salman Khashoggi. For me, being able to see these folks in real life is a little bit like how my daughter would feel about seeing both Olivia Rodrigo and Taylor Swift in the same night, and then afterwards they were like, hey, do you want to go out to dinner? And I was like, yes, and I got to hang out with them even more and tried to keep my cool, so I didn't film that because I'm cool and I'm relaxed and I'm a normal person just like the world's leading TB fighters. The next morning it was time for the meeting itself, which of course meant that it was also time for a fit check.
Now I have a 40-minute walk to the United Nations, which I'm going to spend just luxuriating in my anxiety.
As I walked, I thought about whether I'd have a chance to speak and what I would say and what an honor it is to represent not just Nerdfighteria and Partners in Health, but also people who survived TB and those who didn't. So I made it to the grounds of the UN, where there's this phenomenally beautiful landscaping that some of the richest people in the world get to look down upon, which in my business is known as a metaphor. And then I got inside where everything was, for lack of a better term, extraordinarily United Nations-y. This is cool. I got to wear the earpiece that does live translating and look at all the representatives from around the world and celebrate with other TB activists when the political declaration on tuberculosis was formally approved. Now, the declaration includes big targets for reducing TB in the next few years, which, if honored, will save millions of lives. But of course, it's only a piece of paper unless nations and their leaders fund and implement all the initiatives outlined in it. This was the second high-level meeting on tuberculosis, and I was thinking about how at the last one, in 2018, Shreya Tripathi was still alive. Shreya was a teenager who sued her own government in India to secure access to the life-saving medication bedaquiline for herself and others. And she was also a fan of my book, The Fault in Our Stars. Her fight took her to India's highest court, where she eventually won, but by then it was too late for her. Her lungs were simply too damaged for her to survive. And so, in the end, her death was caused not just by tuberculosis, but also by government bureaucracy and international indifference to TB. And so I was thinking about Shreya as the UN people told me that actually I would have a chance to speak as long as I kept it under 2 minutes. I wish I'd said more, that this is a problem of resource allocation, that disease does not treat people equally unless society treats people equally, that we cannot go on promising to address this crisis without making the choices and sacrifices necessary to enact those promises. But here's what I did say. I want to begin by saying that 23 years ago, Dr. Peter Mugeni, in a room very much like this one, said of HIV medications, where are the drugs? The drugs are where the disease is not, and where is the disease? The disease is where the drugs are not. And that is the situation that we are in today with tuberculosis. The cure is where the disease is not, and the disease is where the cure is not. We have had a disease that is curable for 75 years that continues to kill 1.6 million people. And maybe it was possible to say in the 19th century that death from tuberculosis was caused by a bacterium called M. tuberculosis, but we can really no longer say that. Today we have to accept the reality that since we know how to kill that bacteria, we know how to cure this disease. Today, we have to accept the reality that death from tuberculosis is caused by human-built systems, by human choice. We have chosen the world that we share today, and we can choose a better world. We are currently choosing a world where 1.6 million people die of tuberculosis, and I believe that with your help together, working over the next decade, we will choose a world where no one dies of tuberculosis. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, delegados de Partners in Health.
I hope I did okay, and I hope that Shreya somehow knows that we are still fighting for her, and will continue to do so until the fight is finished. Hank, I'll see you tomorrow.
Right? I focus in helping people in health issues because there is one reason, because it is a one.
Hello guys, welcome to my channel, the place where we share hope and bring benefit to others. And today guys, I want to make a short video to show you guys how I usually get water for my family.
It all began doing every week when I usually went to access water. And if you take a deep look towards this route, you can see different business individuals engaging into their business. Some of them sell vegetables, as you can see. And it's about 1 mile to the stream, right? The water side. And you can see that people are engaging doing their business. This is another route towards the water side. And actually you can see that we are on the journey to get water. Sometimes when we usually go to the stream, we need to make a payment to have access to the water, because according to the youth boys that are living there, they need to take care of the stream. Within the stream environment, some individuals usually dump dirties in the stream. Sometimes the stream will get dirty. So the youth boys need to clean up the stream before we can have access to the water. And if you take a good look of this route we are taking, you can see a big church and a mosque by the left hand side. And people are engaging in construction of buildings, right? You can see the sand and the granite right? And you can see a drum. All these people need.
Welcome back. This is the continuation of the video trying to show you where I usually get to water. This is the center. We have it well. Where I usually get water from my mom. Let's go. After you see the well is full, now we're going to get water here. You can see the one. And please, guys, continue the video, subscribe and share, and let's go for more.
Well, actually, as I can tell you guys, we're here to show you guys based on the water constraints and the community we guys live in. So as you can see, people find it hardly to fetch water. Some come around the stream area, you know, the swamp area just to find water, and it's very difficult. And at the same place, we have the swamp area where usually some people trade there, and it's very filthy. It contaminates the water. But I want you guys to take a quick view on based on what I'm saying. So actually you guys can be enlightened more on the video that we are making here in Embry. As you can see now, this is the swamp, and take a look at over here. This is where people fetch water, and you can see my man Liberian man there is going inside. Please guys, this is your favorite YouTuber Embry, and like and comment. Please keep the vibe rolling. Help my bro building now as we are speaking. So we find it very difficult for us to have, you know, enough and sufficient water, because at this point in time everyone is in need of water. You can see even the construction site need water, and even those who are doing the laundry need water, and the community people too need water. So me and Andre, we are to enlighten you on constraint of water, how we find it difficult to have water in the community. If there is any way you guys can help us, please help us. Share the video and like, comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please show love. It's all about love, you know. Keep the young journalist nigga page on live going, please. It's all about love, eh? Thank you.
Yeah, go.
Hello guys, it's your favorite YouTuber Brookline back in here with Andre Raider, and we have to enlighten you guys based on water constraint. So as you can see, hardly we find it difficult because we don't have free water supply. So most people come to the well to fetch water during the daytime, and in the evening we find it difficult. So these are some of the constraints we go through. And earlier I will show you guys around the swamp area how people live their various lives down this area. So now we are in Brookline Street to enlighten you guys. It's just basic to scare people. As I make this video, I see the look at the laugh and the charity. The left is not for me.
Let's go.
Woo, thank you. I really appreciate that. Hello everyone, welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. Tonight hosted at the beautiful United Parish of Brookline. Many thanks to United Parish for hosting us in this beautiful space. Whew, I was running over here, now I'm out of breath. My name is Megan, I'm the events director at Brookline Booksmith. Today we are here to celebrate a few days early John Green's new book, Everything is Tuberculosis, and it is my pleasure to be introducing him and moderator Vidya Krishna. We will hand over to a small video in just a moment, but I also want to just make the note that if you haven't picked up your book yet, need to purchase another one, you can see my colleagues at the back there. And also if you'd like to speak with Partners in Health and sign up for their newsletter, you can do that at the table on the way out as well. And now, without any further ado, we'll hand it over to a nice little video.
Hi. Hello. Hi. What a joy to be with you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay in the back? Can you hear me in the back? Not really. A little bit. I'll lean forward a little bit. Now you can hear me. I'm going to move the pedestal. Now you can hear me. All right. I tried to call my friend Henry in Sierra Leone so that he could see you and feel excited about seeing you, but unfortunately his phone is off. But he just texted me a couple hours ago, so everything is fine. No need to worry. This is the reason I wanted you to see Henry is because this is a book about tuberculosis, but it's also a book about one individual who is desperately trying to survive tuberculosis, a disease that we've known how to cure since the 1950s. And so what does it say about our shared world that he was able to get tuberculosis in 2010? For me, the book began with meeting Henry, and so I wanted this evening to begin with you meeting him, but alas and alack, life is full of disappointments, and this is a fairly minor one. Before I read a little bit of the book to you, just so that you can plausibly say you attended a book reading, I want to thank you for doing the heroic work of getting out of bed and making yourself go outside and all of that stuff, which is not easy, especially right now. But we did it. Everybody, we did it. Some of you aren't even from Boston. You came a long way to be here, and I want to say a special thank you. Raise your hand if you came from outside of Boston. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here. Oh, there's more of you. Hello. Oh, and there's a baby. There's a baby. The most wonderful thing in the world has happened. A baby has attended the book signing. If your baby starts to cry, you might feel like, oh, I have to leave. You don't. Please stay. Oh, and there's another child. Oh, everything is magical. This is wonderful. I'm so glad that there are babies in the world. What an encouragement at a time when I desperately need encouragement. So I'd like to read to you a little bit of my book, Everything is Tuberculosis. The book doesn't come out until Tuesday, but you are among the lucky few people who get to read it early. And if you hurry, if you go home tonight and decide to make this a priority, you can probably finish it before Tuesday and say that you finished it before everyone else even got to start it. And then you can leave a review on Goodreads, which unfortunately I will definitely read. So just bear that in mind when you're writing your Goodreads reviews. Authors say they don't read them, but they do. All right, this is about the first time I visited Laka Hospital, the tuberculosis hospital in Sierra Leone. I had no idea that there were tuberculosis hospitals back in 2019. I didn't know that tuberculosis was still, for lack of a better term, a thing. But it turns out that tuberculosis is still the leading cause of infectious disease death in the world. And when I came home from this visit to Laka, I started researching and writing and reading about TB because I wanted to understand what was so wrong with my information system that I didn't know about the size of this catastrophe. When we arrived at Laka, we were immediately greeted by a child who introduced himself as Henry. "That's my son's name," I told him, and he smiled. Most Sierra Leoneans are multilingual, but Henry spoke particularly good English, especially for a kid his age, which made it possible for us to have a conversation that went beyond my few halting phrases of Creole. I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "I am happy, sir. I am encouraged." He loved that word, and who wouldn't? Encouraged, like courage is something we rouse ourselves and others into. My son Henry was 9 then, and this Henry looked about the same age, a small boy with spindly legs and a big goofy smile. He wore shorts and an oversized rugby shirt that reached nearly to his knees. Henry took hold of my t-shirt and began walking me around the hospital. He showed me the lab where a technician was looking through a microscope. Henry looked into the microscope and then asked me to, as the lab tech, a young woman from Freetown, explained that this sample contained tuberculosis, even though the patient had been treated for several months with standard therapy. The lab tech began to explain standard therapy to me, but Henry was pulling on my shirt again. He walked me through the wards, a complex of poorly ventilated buildings that contained hospital rooms with barred windows, thin mattresses, and no toilets. There was no electricity in the wards and no consistent running water. To me, the rooms resembled prison cells. Before it was a TB hospital, LaCa was a leprosy isolation facility, and it felt like one. Inside each room, 1 or 2 patients lay on cots, generally on their side or back. A few sat on the edges of their beds, leaning forward. All these men, the women were in a separate ward, were thin. Some were so emaciated that their skin seemed wrapped tightly around bone. And as we walked down a hallway between buildings, Henry and I watched as a young man drank water from a plastic bottle and then promptly vomited a mix of bile and blood. I instinctively turned away, but Henry continued to stare at the man. I figured Henry was someone's kid, a doctor maybe, or a nurse, or one of the cooking or cleaning staff. Everyone seemed to know him, and everyone stopped their work to say hello and rub his head or squeeze his hand. I was immediately charmed by Henry. He had some of the same mannerisms as my son, the same paradoxical mixture of shyness and enthusiastic desire for connection. Henry eventually brought me back to the group of doctors and nurses who were meeting in a small room near the entrance of the hospital, and then one of the nurses lovingly and laughingly shooed him away. "Who is that kid?" I asked. "Henry," answered a nurse, "the sweetest boy." "He's one of the patients we're worried about," said a physician who went by Dr. Michael. "He's a patient?" I asked. "Yes." "He's such a cute little kid," I said. I hope he's going to be okay." Dr. Michael told me that Henry wasn't a little boy. He was 17. He was only so small because he'd grown up malnourished, and then the TB had further emaciated his body. "He seems to be doing okay," I said. "Lots of energy. He walked me all around the hospital." "This is because the antibiotics are working," Dr. Michael explained. "But we know they are not working well enough. We are almost certain they will fail, and that is a big problem." He shrugged, tight-lipped. There was a lot I didn't understand. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. It is now my great honor to introduce my conversation partner for this evening, Vidya Krishnan. So this book would not exist without Vidya Krishnan, because when I came home from that first visit to LaCa, and when I was first reading about TB, and when I was learning about the size of the tuberculosis crisis, one of the first books that I really loved, not the first book that I read, but the first book I really loved, was Phantom Plague by Vidya Krishnan. It's an extraordinary book. There's some copies available for sale here through our wonderful bookstore partners, and thanks to them. And also, while I'm still have you, before I'm in the middle of introducing Vidya, but really quickly I have to say, on your way out, please check with the folks at Results and Partners in Health and the TB fighters and get some resources so that you yourself can become a TB fighter, because we need you now more than ever. But I read this book, Phantom Plague, and it really lit me up. It's such a beautiful book. It's so wonderfully researched and written. And so that book came out in February of 2021 and really changed my life, and I think it might change yours too. So without further ado, everybody, Vidya Krishnan. Hello.
Welcome to...
Is this on? Oh, we're on.
Thank you for writing.
Thank you for writing your book.
This is literary inception. What's happening here?
Yeah.
I want to say welcome to narrative nonfiction.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I hope you stay. I hope you stay.
No promises.
So I read this book over the weekend, and I wonder what's going on in your writing process where a fiction writer, a young adult fiction writer, is writing about a young adult, a different kind of coming of age story, but using narrative nonfiction as a tool. Did you feel limited by fiction, or what's going on?
I think I felt like I couldn't tell Henry's story in fiction because he didn't want me to, and I knew that he didn't want me to. You know, I was writing about tuberculosis from the time I read your book right when it came out, and from the time I read your book until I saw Henry again in 2023, I was reading about tuberculosis constantly and writing a lot about tuberculosis, writing a lot about TB, because writing is my way of thinking. It's my way of understanding the world around me. But I didn't think I was writing a book because I can't write a book about tuberculosis, right? Like, that's not possible for me. That's kind of the way I thought about it. It doesn't make any sense. My audience would be like, what the heck? See how I'm not cursing in the church? And so I felt like it was impossible. But then after I saw Henry again and I learned more about Henry's story, and he began to so generously, and he and his mother began so generously to share their stories with me and asked me to share them more broadly, I felt like a kind of obligation, I guess, to tell the true story insofar as I could. And also, the truth, the nonfiction of tuberculosis is better than any novel could be.
That is true.
It's just an incredible story. I mean, you write in Phantom Plague, and I didn't even get into this in Everything is Tuberculosis because I thought you did too good of a job at it, but like, you write about vampires are tuberculosis. The only reason we have Stephanie Meyer's Twilight novels is tuberculosis. Everything really is tuberculosis.
Everything is tuberculosis. I am wondering at some point, because you're talking about how you process things by writing, and how does because since you were radicalized by Henry, because that's how I started looking at your videos, and someone would send me, oh, do you know John Green has said this about your book? And I'm like, okay, and then it kept coming, and I'm like, why is this person talking about tuberculosis so much?
So were many people in my family. You were not alone in this respect.
But I'm so glad you just got sucked into the vortex and looked closely. I would love to know how your writing feeds into the brilliant resistance that you have built around the movement and access to medicines, and a lot of lovely work that Nerd Fighters do. If you could talk about how writing, is it born out of it? Is it in it?
I don't think it's separate from it. I mean, I think writing can change the world, but I also don't think writing is the only thing that changes the world. I think that people working together and orienting their activism and advocacy in the same direction is incredibly powerful. And when it comes to our community, so I should say here that I've been making online videos because there's some people in the audience who are like infectious disease doctors who thought they were coming to like an infectious disease gathering. And are going to be very confused by what's about to happen. But I've been part of a community called Nerd Fighteria for almost 20 years. That's actually fewer claps than I expected. There might be more infectious disease doctors here than I was completely ready for. And that community does all kinds of things. Like, for instance, here tonight, I think, are my friends Sari and Sylvia, who help run the Project for Awesome, which is this annual fundraiser that we do. That, thanks in no small part to their work, has raised over $25 million for charities like Save the Children and Partners in Health. But we also do other things, like we pressured this large company called Danaher to lower the price of their TB tests. And that was fairly successful, which is pretty cool. Like, we got the tests lowered by 20% in terms of price, which means that the Global Fund was able to purchase 2 million more tests this year, which is pretty incredible, actually. Speaks to the power of community, speaks to the power of what we can accomplish together. For me, writing is an extension of that. Like, writing this book is not like the culmination of my work on TB or anything like that. It's an expression of the next step of my work in TB.
Yeah, I guess that kind of like writing is where a community can meet.
Yeah, a book is where a community can meet, but a book also can bring new people into that community, hopefully.
Hopefully. Which leads me to cues me up for this concept that you write in your book about virtuous cycles.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to see any virtuous cycle right now.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, one of the virtuous cycles is that books are leading to books, and there are so many people here today to be radicalized, I hope, in fighting for TB patients in Asia and in Africa, and all the people who are not here. So I'm wondering, what's the silver lining right now for you?
Oh, I want to be clear that I don't think there is a silver lining. I think right now we're taking, we've taken some huge steps forward in human health in the last 30 years. It's actually quite astonishing what we've accomplished together. But that progress was not natural or inevitable. I'll give you just one example. We've worked for the last 6 or 7 years, our community, this community of nerd fighters, has worked to try to strengthen the healthcare system in Sierra Leone when it comes to maternal mortality, when it comes to the deaths of mothers, and as a result, often also the deaths of infants. And in 2018, when Partners in Health first started intervening in the maternal health care system, first started working with the government of Sierra Leone on maternal health, about 1 in 17 women were dying in childbirth in Sierra Leone, which is an astonishing statistic. And just in the last 7 years, that's been reduced by 65%. Now, there's a long way to go. There's a very long way to go. Maternal mortality is still hundreds of times too high in Sierra Leone, but it's no longer thousands of times too high. And that progress is real, but it didn't happen naturally. It wasn't always going to happen. And I think it's important to recognize, and this is something that you and I have talked a lot about privately, that we can take steps forward toward human health, and we can also take steps back away from better overall human health. And instead of taking like small steps backwards in the last 6 or 8 weeks, we've taken huge, unprecedented steps backwards in the chaotic, unpredictable funding freeze for almost all tuberculosis-related projects with USAID, a huge percentage of HIV and malaria-related projects with USAID, and other funders that come from the US government. That has catastrophic consequences. It's really important to understand that, and I'm on this tour to say that clearly and say it over and over again. That this is a step away from the overall quality of human health. We're already seeing babies being born with HIV unnecessarily. We're already seeing hundreds of thousands of people have seen their TB treatment interrupted. And as Vidya writes about so beautifully in Phantom Plague, we know that means a skyrocketing risk of drug resistance. And we know what drug-resistant tuberculosis means for individuals, that it's much harder to cure, but we also know what it means for communities. When drug-resistant tuberculosis is circulating in communities, that means that many more people are going to get sick with these versions of tuberculosis that are much more difficult for us to treat, and in some cases we can't effectively treat at all. And that is heartbreaking. It's also optional. This resulted from a choice that was made by people. And just like it wasn't natural or inevitable to see progress in human health, it's not natural or inevitable to see the regression in human health that we're seeing today. And so I think that's the most important thing to underline, that there's no silver lining to that. The silver lining that I feel is that you're here, I'm here, all these folks are here. That's a little bit of an encouragement to me.
Yeah.
But I do not feel good about the situation.
No, I was taking the book around to the Chan school, and there were a bunch of questions that were along these lines about where do you find hope and where do you find, it's such a moment of despair. And I feel like where I come from, I live in India, it's the hottest of hotspots for tuberculosis in Bombay particularly. A lot of my book is based in Bombay. And I feel like when you talk about, it's so hopeless, the other option, implicit in is this assumption that there is a second option.
Right.
To, what is like the other option is to kind of sit here passively and wait for death. Or, and this is, again, you said in a different interview where you said we have to fight for the ending we want.
Yeah.
We are totally in a situation where all hands need to be on deck.
Well, and you told me hopelessness is a luxury.
It does feel like, if I went to Bombay and, the slums of Bombay where most of my book is reported, those people repeatedly spoke to me only so that, like you say, they will like tell the stories to other people, so this doesn't happen to someone unsuspecting and walking around thinking tuberculosis is history. And they have no reason to, like there's nothing I have to give them, and they gave me this story so I can bring it here and share with exactly how you spoke about Henry's family sharing their grief with you, and now we carry it around hoping we can like bring a weak magnetic field that is tied with stories around this subject.
Yeah, but I really believe that's possible. I mean, I'll give you an example of a virtuous cycle to tell you why I think this is possible. In Phantom Plague, you write about the story of Shreya Tripathi, a young Indian tuberculosis survivor who fought her government, sued her government for access to bedaquiline, this drug that our community worked hard to get Johnson & Johnson to abandon its secondary patents on. And she eventually won that court case, and as a result, bedaquiline was made available to her and to other patients, although, as you write, still not nearly enough patients, and especially when you were reporting the story, not nearly enough. But she died. She died because her lungs had been too scarred by years of tuberculosis. And she didn't have to die. Her death was optional. As Dr. Jen Furin put it, she died of tuberculosis and official neglect. It's important to say that she died of both causes. And in the 21st century, I would argue, and I argue in the book, that really tuberculosis isn't caused by a bacteria anymore. Tuberculosis is caused by us. Tuberculosis follows the paths of injustice that we blaze for it. It's wrong to see it as like existing independent of human agency, because the places where it strikes are inevitably the places where we allow it to strike, and where we ultimately kind of encourage it to go through neglecting people, keeping people out of the social order, oppressing people, marginalizing them. That is where tuberculosis almost always strikes. Now, any of us can get TB. A quarter of all people have been infected with TB. There's probably people in this room who have been infected with TB. But the vast majority of people who are infected with TB will never become sick. They'll have what we call latent tuberculosis. We don't always understand why active disease develops, but we know that malnutrition is a common reason. Other infections like HIV, other health problems like diabetes are important risk factors. But the biggest risk factor is malnutrition. The biggest risk factor is poverty. The biggest risk factor is living in crowded working and living conditions. The ultimate cause of this disease in the 21st century is impoverishment, is social orders that value some people's lives more than others. And when we build better social orders, when we build better systems, we see less TB. And so Shreya left us this legacy of bedaquiline being legal, bedaquiline being at least part of the conversation in India, and then other TB survivors sued the government, went to the government and said, look, this drug that Johnson & Johnson has patented, and I apologize if there's any Johnson & Johnson fans in the room, but like this drug that Johnson & Johnson has patented, they're going to try to extend the patent, and the way they're extending the patent is completely illegitimate. And the Indian courts agreed, and that is what made it possible for there to be generic production of bedaquiline. And then lots and lots of people came together, including many people in this room, and told Johnson & Johnson it's utterly unacceptable for you to pursue secondary patents on this life-saving TB drug. And now the price of bedaquiline is 55% lower than it was 2 years ago as a result of all those efforts. If it weren't for Shreya, if it weren't for people like Nandita and Fumeza Tisile, who sued her, the Indian, the John.
Mumbai, they filed
You tell me how it happened.
So I wrote about Nandita, and incidentally, Shreya, this protagonist, this teenage girl who had to take the Indian government to court, was just bulldozed over by bureaucracy, essentially. And then the next wave of patients who were trying to get the same drug, which is Nandita, who lost hearing because of the toxic medicines, along with the same story that was unfolding with Fumeza in South Africa. They came together and they challenged Johnson & Johnson's secondary patent in a court in Mumbai, and they won. And it gives me, this is again goes back to that question of, I have no, my problems are not as bad for me to feel hopeless when survivor activists who've lost hearing are going to court.
Yeah.
And I do feel, the more distance you have from the crisis, actually where we are at right now, to me feels like, in the body politic. I've been reporting health for 20 years, and it feels like the cancer that was in the peripheries has just now metastasized and reached the center. Doesn't hold, it's reached the center. And it's because we allowed so many people to die from a preventive disease, and the medicine is accessible, which I want to get you to talk about. I struggled a lot while writing about patent monopolies in my book because I wanted it to be accessible, but I also needed it to be journalistically, accurate, and a journalist's engagement with the story is like how a soldier, you have to be right, and you have to cover these grounds, and you have to structure it, and as against what you do with how you structure Henry's story, and you also make a stop at how patent monopolies are such a hurdle. And I am wondering, this use of very accessible language and talking about really technical, medical, and legal story that you wanted to share, how important was it for you to make it easy for young adults?
Super easy. I wanted it to be a fun read. Like, I realize we're not having that much fun, but I wanted it to be a fun read. Horace said 2,100 years ago that poetry should delight and instruct. And it's easy to delight, it's easy to instruct. It's real hard to do both.
Yeah.
But that's the task I've set for myself. So I wanted it to be extremely accessible. I wanted it so that a teenager or my grandmother, who's no longer living, I don't know why I picked her.
Or the great philosopher Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, I wanted it so that the great American philosopher Donald Trump could read it. I'm kind of going to take the under on whether he will, but it's an option. It's available to him, and I'd love for him to read it. That would be great. Now I'm lost. So I wanted it. Thank you. I wanted it to be very accessible. A great cloud fell over my mindscape. I wanted it to be very accessible, and I wanted it to be pretty fun to read. Like, I cut a lot out of this book. I cut so many chapters out of this book. There's an old line that goes, "I would have written you a shorter letter if only I had more time." And with this book, I had more time.
Yeah, yeah. In my newsroom, I have this. I know someone who routinely says that one day I will make my own newsroom and there will be no editors in it. It's just, do not kill my darlings.
Oh no, I killed a lot of darlings along this route for sure.
I need to kind of pick your brain because from my reporting and everyone I've spoken to in India I've been here for a month now, it does seem like the global health order is falling apart around our ears.
Yeah.
And it's every important program, especially in infectious diseases, has come to a halt. And in my country, infectious disease don't just stop at infectious diseases, they also mean rise in authoritarianism, because Indian Muslims were accused of spreading coronavirus during the pandemic. I was here in the US where Asians were accused of spreading. So we're looking at a lot of, I feel like after decades of, health is not that political, and let's have a conversation about health that is rooted in science. And now we are at an interesting turn, and I wonder where you think health science, politics, and storytelling are kind of interacting with each other right now?
Well, I think they're hugely connected. and I don't think there's any way to deconnect them, because it's not just that human social orders the way that we imagine illness shapes how people live and die of illness, but it also shapes who lives and dies of illness. So if you look at a map of Indianapolis, my hometown, and you map poverty, and then you put a map on top of that that's a map of cancer rates, it's the same map. And if you do that with diabetes, it's the same map. If you do that with infectious disease in Sierra Leone, it's the same map. And so that tells me that the structures that we are building, when they leave people out, or in many cases when they actively oppress people, those structures are shaping disease in profound ways. We cannot see disease only as a biomedical phenomenon. We can't say, oh, this is only caused by bacteria and it's only solved by antibiotics. We know that one of the best medicines for tuberculosis is food. Like when my friend Henry was recovering from tuberculosis, his mom brought him extra food, and it's probably because his mom brought him extra food that he lived. He probably would have died before he got access to the life-saving medication that he eventually got access to if he hadn't been brought so much extra food by his mother. And many patients don't get extra food because their families have abandoned them, because their families are so impoverished that they aren't able to provide extra food. There's all kinds of reasons. So if we know food is medicine, then how can we say that impoverishment, profound absolute poverty that we know causes malnutrition, is somehow separate from the healthcare system? This is part of the healthcare system. And so we have to start imagining all of these systems as interconnected. So I don't remember if I cut this out of the book or not, I apologize, but there used to be something in the book, or maybe there still is, about getting a tetanus shot.
No.
I got a tetanus shot? It's not in there? Okay, great, I cut it. I'll tell you now. Thank you for letting me know that I cut it. I got a tetanus shot once, a few years ago, and when I was getting a tetanus shot, I realized all the things that had to go right for me to get the tetanus shot.
I'm sorry, it's there.
It is there!
It is there. I'm sorry. When you started speaking, I was like, that sounds familiar.
All right, it is there. So I had to do all these, everything had to go right for me to have a tetanus shot, right? There had to be a transportation system that got the tetanus shot the last mile from the tetanus shot facility to the clinic where I got my tetanus shot. There had to be running water so the person who was giving me the tetanus shot could clean their hands. There had to be gloves so that the person could glove up. There had to be refrigeration and electricity so that the tetanus shot could have its cold chain or whatever. All of this stuff, all of these systems had to work together in order for me to get a tetanus shot. And if you start to think about health that way, as inseparable from transportation systems, inseparable from systems of electricity dispersal, like, that's when you understand that, like, human health is part of a much larger system, and that includes our social systems. That includes the way we imagine illness and imagine each other.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I've just lost my. I'm sorry. It does look like you're enjoying stepping. I imagine fiction writers too. As a journalist, I imagine what fiction writers do is poetry compared to like what.
It's
journalists
not.
do
No,
is
it's
like
more like
carpentry.
building a chair. No, I was gonna say it's like building a chair. It's like carpentry. Fiction's carpentry.
No, non-fiction's carpentry. It's all carpentry.
It's all carpentry.
Which is why everyone's just taken to imagine being a writer when all people want to read is a WhatsApp forward. So
Yeah. No, I know. It's hard.
yeah. We are now moving into, how are we doing on time?
I'll look. I've got it. Don't worry. I got you. We're great.
Okay. So
We can move into audience questions.
yeah, that's what I'm doing. This is a question from Suhasini, who's asking, can you describe the experience of meeting and working with Dr. Paul Farmer and PIH? Has this impacted the way you write and the stories that you now feel you are moved to share?
Yeah, I mean, if I hadn't met Ophelia Dahl and Paul Farmer and the other co-founders of Partners in Health and come to know and love the kind of Partners in Health model of making change, there's no way I would have written this book. I mean, if you told me in like 2017 when Turtles All the Way Down came out, like, so you're gonna write one weird book of essays that's sort of a secret memoir, and then you're going to write a book about tuberculosis, I would have been like, what the hell happens to me? Like, and the answer is, like, Partners in Health happens to me. I really think that. I really think that that's a lot of what happened to me. Now,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Is it like getting sucked into going down a rabbit hole and then meeting people in that rabbit hole?
yes, who are like, you're right to be all the way down this rabbit hole. Like, down here is where the truth is, or there is a truth down here anyway.
Yeah.
And I think it is very much like that. And so I really think that if I hadn't, I actually knew Ophelia and other folks at PIH long before I met Paul. But, Paul, who was the co-founder of Partners in Health and who died unexpectedly and suddenly almost exactly 3 years ago, Paul was such a singular person that it's easy to feel like there's nothing to do, like without him we are bereft, and without him we are lost. And I certainly understand that, but I think that Paul left us the path. He left us the path that we need to walk down in order to have stronger overall human health.
Yeah, I actually, for my book, one of the last interviews I did was Dr. Farmer, and he passed away, I think, just before the book came out, or right after the book came out. And I feel I knew him, but I did not, he had no reason to take time out and speak to me. The book was not out, it was not commissioned, I didn't have a publisher. But Dr. Farmer had this just generosity and, warmth, and I felt that somehow he had been preparing the people around him, but also the people he interacted with, for exactly this kind of a situation where, you can't be, it doesn't matter, or, you have to find each other and then go from there.
Yeah.
And this feels a little like that.
Yeah, our mutual friend, Dr. Madhu Pai, he did a remembrance of Paul on the 3rd anniversary of his death, and he asked a bunch of different people, what would Paul say in this moment, this terrifying moment? Because you're right, the machinery of so much health distribution has ground to a halt in a way that is truly terrifying. I mean, that's how I feel anyway. I feel scared and devastated. And what almost everyone said in response to that, from his spouse to his friends, was Paul would say, this is not a moment for cynicism. We do not have room for cynicism. And cynicism is so powerful. It has so much explanatory power because it tells you, like, this doesn't matter because nothing matters. This doesn't matter because everything's stupid and people suck. Like, what an incredibly powerful explainer of the world everybody sucks is, right? It just happens to not be true. Like, life is so much more complex and beautiful and devastatingly heartbreaking than everybody and everything sucking. And so we have to find ways, even in immense darkness, to resist that cynicism and to find a way to believe that together we can move toward a better world.
Yeah, I feel a little, I mean, where I come from, what I feel is not as healthy as what you feel. But I do think that there's just no option at this. Right now is not the time. In my country, the privilege is a function of caste, as against, say, race in this country. And so we have a situation in Bombay, where I write, that the most popular Bollywood star, Amitabh Bachchan, has spinal TB, but most people in Bombay don't know this can happen to them. And right now, if you choose to be cynical, you are not a part of the solution, and I would rather be on this side in whichever small way I can. So this has been cathartic. Thank you for having me here. I have a question from Melissa now, who says, how do you inform your children about all the world issues like tuberculosis without making them feel afraid or hopeless?
That's a hard one. I don't need to tell my kids about tuberculosis for them to feel afraid about the world. They get plenty of it. They know. They're 15 and 11. There's no protecting them from the reality of suffering at this point. But I also don't know the extent to which protecting people from the reality of suffering really protects them. I actually think that we feel more motivated I think a lot in terms of an empathy gap. There's an empathy gap between everybody. There's an empathy gap between you and me. There's an empathy gap between you and me. There's an empathy gap between me and my kids or me and my spouse. Even when I speak about them, I'm speaking about them in the context of myself, right? I'm saying my spouse, my kids, because I only see the world through this one set of eyes, through this one consciousness. It's the only consciousness that I'll be in the whole time that I'm here. And so how do I make sense of what it must be like to be someone else? Well, of course, through empathy. But the further I feel, and that is a feeling, the further I feel from someone, the harder it is for me to empathize, or the easier it is for me to dismiss that person's humanity and to minimize their humanity. So how do we shrink the empathy gap is something I talk a lot with my kids about. How do I take, you know, your feeling and help you understand how your classmate might feel who you find super annoying? Or how do I make you understand, or how do I help you understand what someone like Henry might be feeling in Sierra Leone? You know, as he takes 20,000 pills in order to be cured of his tuberculosis. How do I shrink those empathy gaps? And that's also something I try to do in my work, and I know you try to do in your work, is that part of what storytelling can do or can be, part of what a book can be, is a way to shrink the empathy gap.
Yeah, I feel like when I was reading your book, one of the things that while the language was accessible and you were talking about really complicated things, there was this, it was not infantilizing the reader, because I like the reader to have all the information I can get to you. You know, there is this, I feel as a post-colonial writer that there are two kinds of readers, and we have portions that we humanize, and then there is this thin line where you infantilize.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Yeah, I wonder, was that a...
Oh, I thought about it a lot. I mean, I quote that great Nikki Giovanni poem where she talks about, it's called Nikki Rosa, and she talks about that when especially white writers write about black experience, they never write about how happy you were. They never write about how much you loved your mother. And I thought about that a lot, the risk of infantilizing, the risk of sort of essentializing in some way, you know, which I think storytelling can do, and especially storytelling can do when it's someone from a place like the United States writing about someone from a place like Sierra Leone, writing about a colonized region. Like, it's hard to, you know, one of the first things Paul Farmer ever said to me was, "You got to decolonize your mind, buddy." He said
that
it.
Sounds like him.
Yeah. And it was a joke, but it was also not a joke.
Him and I remember him talking about this moral reasoning. It was a Zoom call before we got to my book. And it was so interesting because I had been listening to his lectures on, you know, he has this thing about how you socialize scarcity. And I struggle with this because in my country, I'm an upper caste Brahmin woman taking an auto rickshaw and going into the slums of Mumbai. But at the end of the day, I come back and, you know, live at my friend's house who's a lyricist in Bollywood. And these two worlds are like concrete bubbles. They don't interact unless, like, I'm in my elevator and my security officer has like tuberculosis and he's coughing and he has no access to medicines at the hospital, and it's such an equalizing force to infectious diseases, so democratizing in that way.
It's an equalizing force because anybody can get tuberculosis. Like you said, a Bollywood star has spinal tuberculosis. Like you can get, and anybody can get TB. It's not, but it is always going to follow the paths of injustice. So it will always primarily affect the people who are most marginalized.
Okay, I have one more question, and it has to be a Taylor Swift question, I'm
told.
Oh,
yes.
I have been told. This is from Becca, who says, what was your favorite era at the Taylor Swift concert, and which era was... I don't know what any of these words mean.
You're doing great. It sounds like you know exactly what you're talking about.
It's not over. Which era best fits this new book?
Oh, this book. what era is this book in? It's a great question. I went to see Taylor Swift, the Eras tour, with my daughter. It was an incredible privilege to be there, and it was so special to see it through Alice's eyes. Because like I like Taylor Swift. I've been a Swiftie longer than some of y'all have been alive, probably. Like, I'm a longtime Taylor Swift fan. I've been to every tour since 1989. I really like Taylor Swift. I've met her a couple times, not to brag. She shouted me out at this really happened, y'all. At the 1989 tour, she was like, there's someone in the audience who is my favorite writer of love stories. And then she played Love Story. And then my wife came back from the bathroom and she was like, anything happen? And I was like, yeah. Yeah, something happened. This book is definitely in my reputation era. My favorite.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah. Well, it means like it's in my like outraged, pissed off, like not taking it anymore kind of era.
We are
Like,
going fist first into conversation.
fist first into conversations, exactly. You are a Taylor Swift fan. That sounds like a Taylor Swift lyric. Going fist first into a conversation. I mean, that you should be a pop star. I think my favorite era. So I actually got a similar question in the last event. Was there anyone who was here in the last event? Yeah. So I said Midnights at the last event, but then I was thinking about it as after the question, and I realized the sort of like folklore Evermore sort of vibe where she kind of like, and there's all the trees and everything. That was pretty cool. So I'm gonna change my answer to the folklore Evermore era part of the Taylor Swift Eras tour was my favorite part.
This is. Thank you for bringing Taylor Swift and tuberculosis together. This has been the most fun. So I happen to be in Boston doing my own thing where Carol, I don't know where she is. She knew that I was in. Oh, there. She worked this magic where I was trying to sneak into the back seats, and she was like, "Oh, you should
just come on stage."
And then I realized this is about writing and tuberculosis, and these are the only two things I care about, writing and tuberculosis. So thank you for having me.
Well, everybody, please say thank you to Vidya Krishnan for being here. Thank you, Vidya. Y'all, this is so special. I feel like I think this is my first time playing a church in some time. I used to be a student chaplain at a children's hospital, and then there was a chapel there, and on Sundays I would preach, and I would do my preaching, and there'd be an audience of like between 3 and 7, depending on how it was going, and then we'd sing Amazing Grace and call it a day. But this is more fun. This is way better. I got to find my the other page of my intro, or we're gonna have a real crisis on our hands, everybody. I might have to just wing it. Did I put it? No. I don't like the way you think at all. You and I are fundamentally different people. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody at the bookstore and everybody in the back who's representing the TB fighters and Results and Partners in Health and other organizations. You all have a role to play in the fight, not just against tuberculosis, but against healthcare injustice generally, and that is not just a fight that happens in Sierra Leone or in India. That is also a fight that happens in Boston. We know that there's inequitable access to healthcare all over the United States. I know that it's a huge problem in my hometown, and I know that it's a problem here, even though there's some of the best hospitals in the world are right here in Boston, that there are people who can't access care every day. And so it falls to all of us to try to bring about a world where there is more healthcare justice. Ultimately, the leading cause of death in the world today is not cancer or tuberculosis or heart disease, but impoverishment, but systems that make it so that we value some lives over others, and it falls to all of us to try to build better systems together, and I'm really proud to be in that work with you, and really grateful to all y'all for being here tonight. I apologize for using y'all, but I am a Southerner. So we're nearing the end of our time together tonight, but I don't blame you if you also feel like we're nearing the end of our time. That is to say, you may feel, as I sometimes do of late, that the world is a little bit like ending. As the noted theologian Timothy Chalamet recently put it, societal collapse is in the air. He really said that. Isn't that beautiful? How does he get to be so pretty and also so succinct? I mean, we know that the world will end, after all. A while back, my then 9-year-old daughter found out that in about 1 billion years, the sun will become a red giant, and it will consume Earth. And when Alice found that out, it was a real bummer of a day in the Green household. And so I know it will end for each of us, for all of us, for our planet. But it won't end today. We don't live then, we live now. We live in the not yet. As I mentioned earlier, my friend Henry loves the verbs encourage and discourage, and I am very discouraged right now. I feel that my courage is being dragged down by all sorts of forces, especially by those who argue or act as if some human lives are more valuable than others. How can we respond hopefully to a moment where hope does not feel rewarded or justified? How can we imagine better worlds when so many power structures seem intent upon making worse ones? I mean, one recent estimate holds that cutting off all US-related tuberculosis funding, as we have, will result in 3 million more cases of TB every year, including a dramatic rise in drug-resistant TB. And that's just one disease among many, and declining human health is just one issue among many. And it's easy to feel like this is the end of history. I don't blame you if you feel it. There's a dread about our historical moment, a general feeling that horror is here and worse is coming. And I feel that too. I mean, why are we even here? Are we here just to witness suffering and experience it? Are we here just to worry? Sometimes it feels that way. But I think while we are in this moment of not yet, we are here to be with each other in the deepest sense, to help others feel less alone and to allow others to help us feel less alone. I believe we are here to accompany each other through the joys and travails of humanness, through the wonder and the precarity. We do not live at the end of history, even though I know it might feel that way. We live in the middle of history. As I argue in the book, we are the products of history, but we are also ourselves historical forces. And together we can change the arc of our shared story. I've seen that happen. The year I graduated from high school, 12 million children died under the age of 5, and last year fewer than 5 million did. That progress wasn't natural or inevitable. It happened because millions of people, billions of people, if you include the taxpayers who contributed, are working together to make the world safer for children. And that is my hope. I know that today feels like the last day and the end of the story because it's the last one we've lived through so far. But today is not the end of the story. It is the middle of the story, and it falls to us to fight for a better end. My friend Amy Krauss Rosenthal, who died of cancer a few years ago, knew this better than anyone I've ever met. Amy used to ask people to sing an old song from World War I, sung to the tune of that New Year's Eve song, Auld Lang Syne. British soldiers in the trenches, horrified by the pointlessness of war, would sing, "We're here because we're here because we're here." And Amy changed the meaning of that song without ever changing the words. She turned it into a kind of battle cry for hope. It's true, maybe, that we can't say with certainty why we're here, but we can nonetheless celebrate being here, especially being here in community. Because that song, when sung together, takes on an entirely different meaning, at least for me. And so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to ask you to sing it with me once now. And bear in mind, I also can't sing, so that's no excuse. We're here because we're here because we're here because we're here. We're here because we're here because we're here because we're here. thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.